Hey everybody, this is Ken with Healthier Home Products. And as you can see, there is no Corey with us today, but there is a Brie. So we lost Corey, but we got Brie. Hi, Brie.
Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Brie, I've got to know Brie from a mutual friend, George Bryant. And Brie is one of the shining stars of the group. I always admired her ability to speak the truth with financial planning and financial talk. And I knew there was a point where it would help to introduce Brie to at least our group and talk about some things. Um, so we're going to do just that. And if you don't mind, Brie, I'm going to tell you a little bit. I don't know how much you know, but in my past, we talk about a healthier home with our products, but that touches on a lot of things. And for me, there's a very specific issue when you talk about finances, how dangerous that could be for your life and your health. And my son's mother died of alcoholism, and the path that brought her to the end was tortured. It was really beyond belief. And when I look back, it seems like a different life, but that path included absolute financial destruction. When you're talking about lawyers, doctors, hospitals, rehabs, all of those things that go on, it was really phenomenal what could happen in such a short amount of time, relatively speaking. And when I look back at that, um, as much as I try not to, I focus on the future. But when I look back at that, it's really amazing that you can pass through that. But I lost 50 pounds with stress related anxiety alone, to the point that people were really worried about they thought I was really sick. I mean, I was sick, but I mean, it was a different kind of sickness. And I know a lot of families can go through chaos. That's just one story. What happened. That's just one story. People can have other stories of how chaos may enter their life. But when you have chaos and financial destruction, it's a real double whammy, and it's a real difficult thing. And if I was the older person talking to my younger person, you at least can console yourself with some of the reality that this too will pass, and it does. But I really wanted to bring somebody in who I really do look up to you, Brie, and I think you can shed some light on some of the things that people can do to have a forward thought on finances. Maybe if you're going through chaos, what are some of the things you can do, and just kind of open that up. I mean, for me, I'll tell you, right now, I mean, I've got an 800 credit score.
Nice.
When I came out of all that, it was in the 500s. I can't even tell you all the things that happened bad. But I got together my plan and I did what I had to do. But again, speaking from your side of things, a little more uh, uh, education based and a little more experience based, what might you tell somebody starting out in life, a younger couple, what might they do to buffer themselves for chaotic times financially?
All right. So if it's somebody who's a little bit younger, who's just kind of getting started in life, one of the first things that you really want to do is kind of get on the same page financially. Like, and that's a surprisingly difficult thing to do. A lot of times, couples, even married couples, it's kind of like his money and her money, and then they have like this one little joint account in the middle that pays for like the mortgage and the internet or whatever else. And oftentimes when I see that happening, there's a lot of inefficiencies running in the household for no other reason than it's just like, one doesn't know exactly what the other one's doing. And so, there's not always like the most cost effective way to buy groceries or health or car insurance or things like that. So you want to get on the same page. And that doesn't necessarily mean merging your money, especially if there's a reason not to. Not every, couples can do things differently and it can all be fine. But you want to make sure that you're working toward the same like life goals. Like, what's the money buying? Like, what are you getting out of your lifestyle? What's important to you? Like, this was a older couple, but she wanted to pay for their kids' weddings and he wanted to take his wife and go on a motorcycle ride across the country. And it was like, well, that's not a money issue. Like, that's not a money issue. That's like a fundamental priorities issue. And so you want to kind of have those discussions and start to get on the same page. And then that's going to be like, this is before you even really bring dollars and cents into the conversation. It's just like, what are we working toward? What do we want our life to look like? And then, like, to start to ward off chaos, you want to have three different types of savings habits. So first you want to be saving for, I call it planting, preparing, and pleasure. And so you want to have some money that you're like planting for the future. So this is very likely is going to be your retirement funds, although, for some of us, it's money to start a business or to buy some real estate or what, like however you invest the money is fine. It's just money that's going to be working for you is going to be the most important thing. Then you want to have money to be prepared. And I call it working capital rather than an emergency fund because I feel like emergency funds have all sorts of connotations and issues that are just, they add drama and complexity to a situation that's just like, hey, this year I'm probably going to need some snow tires and an oil change. So if I just have the money, it's really a non-issue. But if it has to be an emergency to spend your money, it makes your financial situation much more stressful and dramatic. So you want to look like a year out and say, all right, well, what are the things that I can totally see coming? I have like at my house, like we get our car taxes twice a year. It's not a surprise.
Right.
It's, like also I'm in New England, so we have heating expense and that's not a full year expense. So you want to look for those things. Then you want to look for like the foreseeable disasters. Like, is your car a piece of crap? Is your furnace on the fritz? Is your roof impending doom? Like are there disasters that we should be starting to look for? Then you want to think about like family obligations, like back to school, holidays, your brother's wedding, whatever's coming up. And then sometimes too, we have self-care that's not necessarily monthly, but it needs, most adults don't need to go clothes shopping every single month.
Right.
So it's like, all right, well, how much do I want to spend on clothes? Do I go quarterly? Do I go semi-annually? I'm not blonde anymore, but when I was blonde, I had to go get my roots done. And it's not every single month, but it was a $200 expense. And so you want to start to think about those things. And if you have kids or pets or a house, that number adds up to be something substantial. And that's generally where people end up in debt because they don't have the money for the emergency. And then all of a sudden it's time to buy heating oil or something like that. And then they throw it on the credit card just for convenience. And they're like, oh, I'll pay it off. And, if you do that too many times, it ends up growing instead of going up, coming right back down. Then another really important thing is to have money set aside for like the pleasure in life, like travel or home renovations or jet ski. I don't care, whatever floats your boat. But it's got to be something that's like really good for you, like something that you really want. Because otherwise it's hard to build those habits, right? Like you're going to set aside a little bit for retirement, and that's going to buy you like long-term security. Being prepared is critically important, but setting money aside for the impending doom of your furnace breaking just isn't all that fun. So you want to make sure that if you're setting something aside, that you have something to like, when you're debating with yourself, well, should I go out for a beer and chicken wings tonight? Or do I really want to go to, the ocean this summer, whatever's important. So you want to have those three kinds of savings habits. And then it really helps to have those habits in place and some financial strength, some savings when, disaster happens, because most of us are going to, over the course of a lifetime, sometimes, we might get divorced or we might get sick or we might, even just get hurt and lose your income for a few weeks. And that's all the sort of stuff where if you don't have some money aside, it's very easy to fall kind of into a downward spiral. What's interesting is that scarcity is an amygdala response. So it's the same part of your brain that triggers a fight or flight response. So like if you're in your world and there's a shortage of money, the way that your body perceives that message from your brain, which is like, well, we're going to be late on our car payment, or there's, something's happening. Like what's that, that signal, it's starvation in the body. Like it's a very real threat to your brain, like to your physical self. Like even if it's, if you've ever like had literal panic over something financial that was just really not that big of a deal, you know what I'm talking. Like one time I got a speeding ticket.
That's like stress. That's exactly.
Oh yeah, I
had
a speeding ticket, or and it was really financially not that big of a deal. But when the envelope came, it was like my whole body was like freaking out. And so scarcity is, it's when you're in that mode, your brain needs everything that it's got to get you to be able to run or fight. And so you shut down your higher levels of thinking, which is why scarcity is kind of a trap. Like, it's really hard to get out of it, because once you're in scarcity, it does this to your perception. It's like being in a tunnel. It's like like everything gets kind of dark, and you want nothing more than to be out of there. And so it ends up really you can end up making really wonky decisions from that place.
I mean, you brought up a whole bunch of things there to unpack, but does it ever really work where people have dissonant goals? I mean, early on in the relationship, when I was first married, I was more concerned about the future, and she not so much. And so there were two, it was just a fight going on. Sometimes a real fight, but certainly a fight in actions, with how one was behaving financially and one wasn't. And is there ever a way where that works, or do you have to get on the same page? Because I feel like there was a lot of inequity. I would do my job trying to save, and somebody was less than what I consider to be honorable to the relationship financially. How's that?
Yeah, so it can happen, and it also depends on the dynamic of the relationship.
But in a blue sky world, you're advising get both on the same page. Everybody.
Yeah, and so there's some things too. So this is a little bit deeper than. There's some things that will cause a financial leak in your life that need to be addressed. And so misery is dreadfully expensive. If you hate your job, hate it, if you hate your job, and that's just because that's like a big thing. It's almost impossible to have actual financial success when there's something that sucks the ever living life force from you. And so my guess is, in your situation, so addiction is also one of those things that's generally caused by some sense of deep internal unworthiness or self-loathing, or there's something usually big going on there.
Right, that's correct. Right.
And so all of the money in the world can't fill something like that. So it's not just a blue sky world, but you have to be relatively, mentally or spiritually, or however you want to say it. We all have leaks. Nobody, there's no amount of self-development or personal development or church you can go to be 100% feeling worthy at all times. If you know anybody that knows that, let us know.
Hey, I always say there was only one perfect person in this world. They put him on a cross. So
yeah. And so so that was probably, in that situation, there was probably more going on there than just a financial thing. It's probably a little bit deeper. And so those are also things that need to be addressed in a relationship. If financial infidelity is real, I've seen betrayals, financial betrayals that damage a relationship to the equivalent of taking someone home from the bar. It's, because
it sounds dirty, but it's not.
It's financial betrayals can be, super, they can really put a damper on trust, and it usually leaves very lasting consequences. You know what I mean? Sometimes one person does something with the credit cards, and then the other one's left cleaning up the mess, or one spends money that wasn't meant for spending on something that wasn't a priority, and the other one's, really left feeling some kind of way about it.
Right.
And so getting on the same page will help with that, but getting on the same page isn't going to, it's not going to make up for something that actually may need therapy or counseling or things like that.
Oh, right. Yeah, there were more hurdles than just that. So there's two other things that come to mind with that previous conversation. When you talk about those 3 Ps, what might some of those percentages look like? If you're talking about planting, if you're talking about preparing, if you're gonna just throw a dart at a just give somebody an idea. What might be some numbers that you might look at?
All right. So usually I go a rule of thumb. And again, you're going to want to figure out some of your numbers depending on your age and where you live and a number of factors. You are going to want 10% as a rule of thumb for planting. And if you start younger, 10% is fantastic. If you're starting older, you may need to really be more, a little bit higher percentages. Right. The other two numbers really come down. You don't actually need a percentage. You actually really need a number more so. So for the working capital number that I talked about, those are the numbers where you want to really list them all out, total it up, divide it by your number of paychecks. So let's say you total up all the things on your working capital account, you come to $12,000. You get paid biweekly, so that's going to be $500 a paycheck, and that's going to be how you're going to do it. And the same thing for your pleasure account. So if you're, planning a vacation, you kind of want to price it out, or if you're going to buy a jet ski or whatever you want, you're going to want to price it out and decide when you want it by, and then figure out the number from there.
So a follow-up on that is, how do you get somebody, and I know you've done this hundreds of times, so somebody hasn't built up that pattern of planning or savings, and it's that first step. I find it to be the same with a lot of things, whether it's getting ready to run for a race. The hardest part is getting out of bed, putting your shoes on, and starting that first day of running. How do you get somebody from zero financial planning to that first step? Where do you take them from zero to, what's your goal in those people's
so you just got to get started. It's very rare that I do math with someone and we're like, oh, of course we'll just implement these 3 savings habits that fully funded all at the same time. Never. So you just have to get started where you are. So for your if it's a retirement account, especially if it's something through work, it's just calling HR and getting it set up. Start with the 1%, and then put a note in your calendar for every 6 months to increase it a little bit, or every time you get a raise to split it in half, or you just get started where you are. And the same thing for working capital. Working capital, those numbers are generally pretty big for people. If you have a house and kids, you're generally going to be looking at more than $1,000 a month. And of course, it's different for everybody, but they're not tiny numbers, because it's everything that typically catches you off guard. And those are the numbers that go into working capital are generally what ends up on a credit card otherwise. So you just get started where you are. Let's say it's a $500 a paycheck, and you can get started with $150. Well, you just get started with $150, and you'll watch your emergencies go down. And then if you're paying off debt, then you'll watch your debt go down, and then you'll do it that way. Or what's amazing and not easy to explain is that once you start really taking control of your situation, lucky things end up starting to happen. Influxes will come in, and you'll since you're already planned for and allocated, you can really get ahead with it. Even things like a little bonus at work, or the months where we have 3 paychecks instead of 2, things like that, where it ends up being easier once you have some momentum.
Right. Well, I think the other thing that happens too is once you get ahead of that curve, that stress level drops, and nothing seems it's in baseball, they call it the game slows down. When you start to get really good, the game slows down. It's not as hurried. When you put the debt aside and you can get ahead of the game, you feel less anxiety and less worried about those things that do pop up.
Yeah. So one thing I really work with clients on, if you're working to pay off credit cards, you have to build a savings habit at the same time. There's a financial guru who says to save $1,000 and then put all money towards credit cards, and I don't find that to be effective at all for my clients. Unless if that's cute, it's fine if you have $3,000 of debt, sure, go ahead, gazelle intensity, have at it. But the thing is if you do that, then you still don't know how to have money. The only reason why you'll have debt is because you need money, and if you had money, you wouldn't need money. And so you have to learn how to have money.
I love that thinking. That's so
like
smart.
you have to learn how to have it.
Right.
And so as you start to pay off your debt, you want to increase your ability to have money. And so especially if you think you're bad at money, if you don't trust yourself, having money can be just as stressful as not having money, if that's a change of circumstances for you. And so building up those savings habits is going to be really important because it prevents you from needing to go right back to the credit cards. So if you play a game with yourself and every month you pay a huge chunk on your credit cards, but then by the end of the month you're using your credit cards again because you're out of cash flow or you don't have any money in savings, well then even though you might be making some progress on the debt momentarily, you still have the same habits of going right back to them.
The skill set's missing, right?
So generally when I'm working with clients, one of the first things that we do if we're getting out of debt is we just stop using the cards for a few months. We just get used to using and working with what we're working with instead of we put them in the freezer. Like you still have them, you still have access to them. But they're literally like in a Tupperware full of water where
I love it.
Slight barrier. Like you can still use them. You don't have to close them. You don't have to get rid of them. But there's enough of a barrier where you don't have immediate access to them. So you have to consciously do this. And so, if you were thinking like, oh, well, I'm having an emergency. I really must have this credit card. Of course you can go get it. But if you're like, oh, am I going to dig those things out to make this Amazon purchase? No, I'll just, I'm not going to chisel it out, go against my goals,
right.
to be able to buy this instead of getting up to get my debit card type thing. Like, okay. Then we start to build. And so while we're doing this, of course, we're always making at least the minimum payments, but then we start doing the savings habits and it's a slightly longer road, but it's so much more sustainable. So once you've stopped using your credit cards and now you're just learning to spend with what you've got. So that's the first part of it, because you used to have the habit of overspending, dipping into your cards when you ran out of money. So now you're learning to live actually on what you've got. And then you start to learn to save. And then you start to work on paying off the debt. That's really the way to do it. And so that way, by the time the debt is gone, the savings account is built and you've been off of your credit cards for some time.
Right.
And so that way you're not immediately going back, because I'll tell you, I have a lot of clients who come see me and they're like, oh, I sold my house and I paid off all my debt. And then they come see me and it's a truly risky place to be in when you do it that way, because your comfort zone and your habits are still in debt. And now you just had a lump sum. So you took care of it, but you're still the same person. It's like, imagine if I went for gastric bypass surgery and then got a milkshake on my way home. It's like that sort of thing.
Right. Well, the skill set's needed, right? I mean, and that's what it's one of the things I love about you when you go through this stuff. You really take a holistic approach to somebody on their financial well-being. There's kind of a funny story. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but Brie, when first time we met, we were talking about building the businesses that we're all a part of, and Brie was reluctant to ask for referrals, but I was trying to tell her she has no idea the relief she provides people. And you could tell just listening to her speak, she's very homespun and a very down-to-earth person. She's not frightening like a lot of these you feel like every time you meet a financial guy, they're, hey, buy this whole life policy. I don't want to buy a whole life policy. Brie is not that person. So first of all, where can people reach you? Because these conversations get a lot longer and you have so much to give. You got to let people know how to reach you.
So I'm on Facebook. So my business page is Sheep to Shark with Brie Sodano, and we have a private Facebook group. And I do a lot of content there for free. And then if I'm offering anything, that's normally where it is. Should I put that in the comment?
No. Love it.
Oh, look at it. You guys are already all over it. It's happening right now. It's in the comments.
They're so good. And I've heard something really interesting that you actually got the book done.
Oh, so it's not done. The book is in the works, but I have a publisher. I'm working with Jesse Krieger over at LE Press.
Jesse's awesome.
Yeah, so I'm super pumped. And Actually, in the next probably week or so, or it could be longer. I don't know. I don't know how long it takes to design a book cover, but that's the next step. So I'm working on writing it right now.
You'll knock that out. Well, this is a much deeper conversation. There's a lot of things that could go, and I really want to talk about kids and building some habits in kids as well. This is perfectly relevant to me as well, and I know other people are in that same boat. You want your kids to get off on the right foot, but maybe we could have you on again and talk about some of those things.
Yeah, of course, I'd love to.
Bring people on. We kept you long enough here, but I mean, I love your information. I thank you for being our guest. Reducing stress is a big deal. Brie is a queen at it. She will work with you and help make your life better financially. So thank you for joining us, Brie.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to. Yeah, if anybody's got any questions or need anything, just ask. I'll be here.
We'll hit that on the link as we post this as well, how they can reach you.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Brie. Thank you for joining us.